Hello, healers. My name is Ben, and this is the Moss Report. For over 50 years, the Moss Report has been on a mission to research and report on less toxic, more natural ways to fight cancer. In this video, we're going to be speaking with my father, Dr. Ralph W. Moss, as we plan a visit to several different clinics down in Mexico. We're glad you're with us as we begin our journey. All right, good morning, Dad.
Good morning, Ben, Liz.
Morning, Ralph.
I wanted to talk with you about this trip that we're planning. Very exciting to be going back to Mexico and visiting with some of the clinics that we've been to before in years past, and reconnecting with some old friends of yours and colleagues, people, some of whom I know from long ago as well. And yeah, I think it's going to be great. I think we have some interesting new clinics to visit, and I'd like to reconnect and see where things are with some of the clinics that we've already reported on, make sure that they're still operative and so forth. So I've got up on my screen here, I've got the maps of the clinics in the Tijuana area. I'd like to go over them with you, and I'd like to talk about which ones we want to go visit. So basically, I just did a Google search here for Tijuana Cancer Clinic, and this is what it's come up with. Now, if we look over here, on the left here, we see the list, and then we see the actual location. So a number of these we're familiar with. This one, St. Andrews, Hope for Cancer, CHIPSA. We've reported on all of them in the past.
For sure.
Let's take a look and see. This one we haven't yet been to, you said, right?
Yeah, haven't been there, but under that name, I'm pretty sure that's what's so-called Gerson Clinic. Gerson never officially acknowledged, or not in many years, officially acknowledged a clinic. In other words, there's a hands-off relationship between the clinic and the Gerson movement, which is international. But I think this is Gerson, that Max Gerson wrote a book called 50 Cases, and he claimed to be able to cure cancer with diet alone, with plus a few other injections of things. But it was a very controversial figure in the 1940s and 50s. So when the FDA cracked down basically on alternative treatments in general, and starting in 1962, a lot of some of the American practitioners of alternative medicine fled over the border. And that was the origin. 63, the Hoxsey, Mildred Nelson, who was Harry Hoxsey's nurse, went to Tijuana and opened up a Hoxsey clinic called Biomedical Center there. So that was the origin. And not to get too pedantic about it, but after that, there were two other waves, as it were, of alternative clinics, two other trends, one of which was there were three clinics. I think the only one still functioning is the Oasis of Hope. So Oasis of Hope was Dr. Ernesto Contreras's clinic in the beach area. That's what you see on the map there, the Playa. It's a very pleasant sort of suburban area of Tijuana, which is very busy, teeming type of area. But the beach area was very attractive, and that's where you see a lot of the clinics have located there. So you had Hoxsey, you had Gerson, and then you had the three original clinics that came into Tijuana. And then with the upsurge in the 60s, especially 70s and early 80s, you had something like 70,000 North Americans, U.S. citizens or U.S. Residents, came over the border for treatment of cancer.
Huh.
in the Tijuana area. Something like, I think Newsweek said 70,000
Wow.
people. So
I mean,
yeah, a
that
big,
represents a goodly proportion of people seeking treatment.
absolutely. If you think of people with advanced cancer, of whom there probably were
Yeah.
um, about 500,000 per year. So yeah, it was a significant, maybe 1/7, one out of every seven, just a rough estimate.
Right.
American, North American, or U.S. Cancer patients with advanced cancer were going to Mexico. So it was quite a thing, and there were people selling along the roads. You could buy
Yeah.
snacks and tacos and get your at the same time. So it was a phenomenon at that time. And some of those clinics still exist. None of them just exclusively or even mainly used anymore, but it's still part of the scene there.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And
Well,
I
that's
just I just want to mention, Ben,
yeah.
one
So what do
thing.
you think? I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just as a little bragging rights here, that I made my first visit to a Tijuana clinic in April of 1976. So and I went to see Contreras, basically dropped in. I was in Anaheim for a federation meeting. I was the public relations person accompanying my big boss, Bob Good, who was giving the presidential address at a big convention in Anaheim, and I snuck away from that Sloan Kettering function to go down and see what all the shouting was about,
Right.
basically.
Yeah.
And it was unbelievable experience. So, in many ways, um, because I left Sloan Kettering, in order for me to exit my office in the big in the what we call the new hospital on 68th Street, I had to go through the outpatient department, and you heard nothing but moaning and groaning and vomiting and horror show. It was horrible. I mean, just people looked awful. They were getting chemotherapy in the old days, and there wasn't
Right.
much control of the side effects. So I come down to Tijuana, Mexico. It's like a little, I mean, Contreras Clinic at that time. It wasn't in the big building they have now. Like a little paradise. And you go in, and there was a fountain in the middle, and music playing, and palm trees swaying. It was like, what? This is unbelievable. And I got in to see the big man without unannounced. Dr. Ernesto Contreras, who was demonized in the American media. He was the sweetest gentleman, very religious, very kind, gentle, played the guitar for the patients, gave had church services Sunday morning, not hell and brimstone, but kind, do unto others type of
He
Christian.
himself was the
Oh,
officiant at the.
absolutely, absolutely. And he'd come with his guitar, and he was just a grandfatherly guy. He had very good credentials, by the way. He had studied at Harvard, and basically was a top doctor in the military in Mexico.
Oh,
So it was 180 degrees different from the way the U.S. media predominantly was depicting him. And
yeah.
this was the days of Watergate, and of tremendous Vietnam War, and tremendous skepticism about the U.S. government. So it just felt to me like just another example of the government, the big mainstream media, lying to people about some crucial issue. That didn't make an effective treatment, by the way, but
Right.
it did completely undermine the narrative that people were rushing to mills. I don't know what made that a mill as compared to a chemotherapy clinic. It was nothing like that. And the patients, and again, I was undercover. I didn't reveal my Sloan Kettering affiliation to
Uh,
any of these people. I
Interesting.
just walked in as an interesting
And,
observer, and I talked to a lot of people. And what I gathered was, talking to these American, I hate to say Americans, because Mexicans, of course, are Americans,
right.
well, but North American, U.S. citizens,
Yep.
was that they were desperate to solve their cancer problem.
Right.
They were desperate to get away from the so-called slash burn and poison approach to
Right.
cancer, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. And they were highly, highly gratified with the treatment that they were receiving. Maybe too much so, but we could talk about that more. But in any case, they must either the and that what Contreras was doing had a strong beneficial medical effect, or the placebo effect, meaning the mind body connection, was much stronger than anybody at that time was willing to admit. Because I spoke to people who had severe pain. One man said to me that his throat cancer was like somebody stabbing a knife into his throat, turning it back and forth continuously. And this
Oh,
went away. The pain went away within a
oh,
week of the
oh,
time that. So again, I'm not going to say they did it. I don't
no,
know. I'm just reporting what the
right,
subjective experience was of some of
right.
the people who went there. Um,
Well,
and and then there was the rage against the U.S. government for denying them this supposed cancer cure back in Kansas or Iowa or wherever was very great in some of the people. And it's still, it's funny because like almost 50 years later, I can still see these people in my mind's eye and I can hear their voices. And, it was a profound experience for me. Um, and then I go back to my big FASEB meeting with whatever 30,000 scientists listening to my boss, Robert A. Good, giving this lecture on immunology and immunotherapy, which, of course, at that time was and still is in a way, the cutting edge of conventional medicine, but was also not acknowledged, was demonized in many ways by the establishment. So I got a picture of two worlds of cancer, and, America, North U.S. being one pole, and these sort of ragtag clinics in Tijuana being the other pole. And there was a kind of a war into, a very strange experience. And I've gone back many times. I wrote pretty much the only scholarly article ever written about the Tijuana clinics. It was published in a peer-reviewed medical journal, Integrative Cancer Therapies, about midway point between my first visit and now. And I saw many flaws to the clinics that I analyzed in that article, which we could talk about. But the positive side was also very much there. I think they've been very humane on the whole. Now, there were some absolute outright frauds and some very dangerous things that also went on. But on the whole, you look at the history of these clinics, they did offer an option for the people in the United States and abroad, other countries who wanted something different. They wanted a more humane, a kinder, softer kind of treatment, not necessarily go for broke chemo, which very rarely cured people anyway. So I think it's something, and I made many visits, by the way. I think I've made about 10 visits, separate visits to the Tijuana cancer clinics.
Well, do you
And
want to come with us this time?
I'd love to, but no, I can't.
Okay, all right. Well, we're going to go in your stead and we'll try to
Good.
get you on a Zoom session with all of the
Yeah,
directors of these clinics that we're going to visit.
I'm looking forward to it.
And Elizabeth is going to help coordinate that and put it on the schedule for
Yeah,
you to have and be ready for. And
yeah,
we'll have a nice list. I
yeah,
hope to be able to hit a number of these, especially some that we haven't been to. If they've arrived on the
absolutely.
scene and they're doing something
Yeah,
novel, especially if they're doing something that has a particular philosophy or an approach that maybe we don't know about. We want to share that information with our
good. And
but
my approach basically was what I called friendly skepticism. I tried to combine a friendly, positive, supportive attitude with scientific skepticism about the methods, because whether or not a treatment works, there are defined ways of establishing that through the so-called pyramid of evidence. culminating in randomized controlled trials. So I believe in that. I believe in that aspect of evidence-based medicine. But
Right.
on the other hand, if you go in a hostile way, if you're so skeptical and you think that these people, they're quacks,
True.
but you're not, you know, that
Yeah.
somehow American medicine is the pinnacle of all goodness, and that the standard treatments are proven therapies, and these are, just that the motives of the people down there are impure and venal. So if you
Uh,
go in with that attitude, you won't get anywhere,
okay.
and you're not going to,
Well,
won't be able to penetrate to the heart of what they're doing. And I think
yeah.
that's what we want to do. We want to continue that
Well,
tradition.
I think they know of us by
Oh,
now, and I think that they're, of course, will know that they're going to put their best foot forward. But my
yeah,
approach is that I'm not a scientific. I don't have a scientific background, truly. So I'm just going as a layperson. My interview style is going to be someone who's just curious as to what's going on from a traveler's perspective. In some ways, it's going to be a travel vlog.
yeah,
Essentially, we're going to share with people who watch our videos and read our articles what they can expect in a trip down to Mexico if they wanted to seek some treatments down there.
I
And
agree.
we'll try to see if we can't talk to some patients as well, and get
But
a good overview of these things. So we're going to take a look at these clinics, and we're going to also look at these other clinics on the other side of town.
yeah,
I don't think we need to have, for the sake of this short recording for our
yeah,
audience, a full list of everyone we're going to.
right.
But let's just say there are some as far south as the end of the Baja Peninsula that we're going to
Well,
want to
down,
to
yeah. Well,
visit. So we have a little traveling to do.
but
It should be interesting, and I hope that our subscribers will join us for that adventure.
I hope so too. No one else is doing this. It's an essential uh, task that we've set for ourselves and for our viewers and readers. It's not something that you're going to find either in the pro or the con literature. So you need somebody who could go down and be able to give you an honest assessment without fear or favor. I've gotten one time I was kicked out of one of the clinics. They found out in quotes, I was an advisor to the National Institutes of Health in the US. That was enough. They canceled the meeting, basically escorted me out of the clinic. That happened once, A few other things. One time I was tempted to call the police because of the abuses that were going on in the clinic. Luckily, I didn't. I should have, but I didn't. And that same week, the federales came in and shut the clinic down. So you see all kinds of things. I've seen frauds, obvious frauds going on,
Yeah,
life-threatening situations. But by and large, I mean, you see that bad things in the U.S. as well. By and large, it's I think the impulse is a humane one, and I think it's something worth exploring. Whether the science of it we could talk endlessly about, but in terms of what is it really like to go down there, to go across the border, you're in a different culture, you're in a
right.
different milieu, different attitude. It's amazing, but
And I think it's very frightening for people who they're already in the midst of dealing with a diagnosis.
correct,
Their health and
correct,
their immune system may be compromised, and their weakened state
yeah,
might be, existent. They might be dealing with side effects from chemo or
yeah,
radiation, have you, and then to think about, oh my gosh, I have to go to a country where I don't speak the language.
yeah.
I've heard maybe things about it that are frightening,
Mm,
dangers that, the unknown is a dangerous thing, and the unknown treatments are dangerous too. You don't know what you're going to get into, and
right,
the integrity of the people who are, going to be treating you. I'll be honest.
absolutely,
I mean, I'd wanted to go down to Mexico for dental work, but when you tell people about it, they're like, "Oh my God, don't do that." Like,
yeah,
oh, whoa, that it's too off grid for most people to think about. They'd rather just
sure,
their local dentist. And to be fair, that's what I've done in the past.
yeah.
I may actually try to sneak a little trip into the dentist, get one or two things taken care of while I'm
You've
down
got some
there.
amazing looking facilities. I'll say that. I haven't
Yeah. And I
used
think
them.
actually this is a relevant topic because I think that more and more people have gone to Mexico for dental procedures.
Yeah,
And that speaks fairly well, I think, of
yeah,
going to Mexico for medical types of things because, if they've
yeah,
got good dentistry, then that sort of dovetails, I think, with other types of medicine. I mean, it is,
yeah.
can be
Well,
very,
it's a very it's a
involved.
complex, very complex situation, and you know they're striking a balance between offering something different and oftentimes something new that would be enough to attract people to come to the clinics, but also not over promoting these things. Because if you over promote and you imply that you have a cure for uh, late stage cancer, then of course you're going into the realm of quackery. I mean, that's one very is very hesitant, even with conventional treatments, to talk about cure. So you can judge something based on the way they present themselves. You can judge a lot because that's illegitimate to basically claim that you have a cure for advanced cancer. Um, but on the other hand, we know that sometimes people are cured of cancer, but you can't predict. I've seen it too many times. I mean, many
Right.
times with many treatments, it worked in one person, and the next person nothing happens or they get
Yeah.
worse and so forth. So
And
medically, it's a complicated situation, but we can judge, even as a layperson, you can judge the experiential aspect. What
right.
is what are you going to find when you go down there? Who are these people?
And
What's
when we
your
get you
judgment?
on okay, when we get you back on the Zoom call with
Yeah,
the clinic directors,
yeah,
I would expect that your conversations will center mostly around what does their philosophy of integrative medicine for cancer look like? Is it something that's based on scientific research, or is it something that's based on just their own practical experiences,
yeah,
or is it, hocus pocus? That's
right.
sort of the questions that we need you to delve into since
Hmm.
neither Liz nor I have the scientific knowledge to discuss
Right.
those things.
Yeah,
And we'll be able to provide, as you said, the experiential side of things.
right.
So yeah, I think this is going to be great. I think that video or that series of videos of our tours of those clinics should be
Yeah,
well received by our audience.
hope so.
So, okay, so let's wrap this up and
Right.
let's continue our plan for our tour of Mexico, and
Sounds good.
we'll see our subscribers in the next video.
Great.